This week on The Inside Story, a pause in fighting between Hamas and Israel. Hostages freed and prisoners swapped. The conflict spills overseas with a rise in threats of hate crimes in the U.S. Plus, Ukraine sees the largest single drone strike to date in its war with Russia. Now, on The Inside Story, a fragile pause.
Hi, I'm Jessica Drury, VOA's Press Freedom Editor here in Washington. As we record this episode, a fragile pause in the Israel-Hamas conflict is in place. During the break in fighting, Hamas has released more than 70 hostages taken during its October 7 terror attack in Israel. In return, Israel has released over 150 Palestinian prisoners. But what happens when the temporary truce expires? All this and an update on the war in Ukraine on The Inside Story. This week's hostage releases are welcome news for many families, but dozens more, some of them children, remain held by Hamas. Linda Gradstein reports from Jerusalem.
It seemed an entire nation held its breath while waiting for Hamas to free the Israeli children it held hostage. Many Israelis cried as they watched each hostage release over the past few days. On Monday, mediator Qatar announced that Israel and Hamas agreed to extend a ceasefire for 2 more days, raising hopes among Israelis that more people, including children that Hamas had taken hostage on October 7th, would be released. Ohad Mundar, a thin boy who likes to play with Rubik's Cubes, turned 9 while being held captive by Hamas with his mother, Karen. He was reunited with his father in the hospital. His cousin, Meirav Raviv, says that Ohad has lost weight but seems healthy and happy to belatedly celebrate his 9th birthday with his friends at the hospital.
But they were talking and laughing and like normal kids. It wasn't that easy for him, but Karen said that he behaved very nice. There were times that he was crying. And also when he came back, I mean, the tears when he saw a sensitive movie or something that someone told him something. So it was emotional, but I hope he will get back to normal as soon as possible.
Israel says Hamas captured 40 children out of a total of 240 hostages. An official from Qatar said that 10 of the children are under the control of other militant groups and that it is not clear if Hamas can find them. The freed children will have to work through the trauma of their ordeals, psychiatrists say. Some, like 4-year-old Abigail Idan, saw their parents killed. Her father was holding her when a Hamas militant shot him.
The condition is not normal. There are different reactions. One will cry, another will speak about different things. One will wet his bed, another will be afraid to go out from the safe room because that's the only safe place, or another won't agree to go into the safe room because the memories of the safe room are the memories of death and danger.
As part of the ceasefire deal, Israel released 3 Palestinian prisoners, all women or minors, for every hostage who was freed. Among the released prisoners was Fatima Shaheen, convicted of trying to stab an Israeli settler.
We are happy that she was released, but only slightly so, because we cannot ignore the dire conditions in Gaza, where thousands have been killed. It is not suitable for us to be happy at this time.
The Israeli families say that the reunions with their children released from Hamas captivity are bittersweet because there are still so many remaining hostages. They say they will not rest until every family is reunited. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, Jerusalem.
The White House has welcomed the announcement of the extension of the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel and the agreed-upon release of 10 hostages per day during this pause. Anita Powell reports from the White House on what comes next.
The White House is applauding the release of Hamas-held hostages with the hope that 20 more captives will be reunited with loved ones in coming days.
That's really the goal here, get all the hostages home with their families where they belong. And however long that could take.
People on both sides of the tense border celebrated the weekend exchange of prisoners held by Israel for hostages taken by militant group Hamas in its surprise October 7th attack on Israel. Palestinian Authority Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki, speaking in Spain, welcomed the pause.
Any Israeli attack, instead of killing one child, will kill two. So for us, it is important to try and extend this truce as long as possible.
Israel's leader, in welcoming the hostage release Monday, reiterated his main goal.
We are also continuing with the main goal we set to bring about the release of our hostages, to complete the elimination of Hamas, and of course also to ensure that this threat will not repeat itself in Gaza.
Analysts say this widely welcomed pause is unlikely to bring an end to this complex and, for both sides, existential conflict.
There are two separate problems. The long-term end to the fighting is going to require the dismantlement of Hamas, probably not in any realistic way the complete elimination of all of its fighters or capabilities or ideas, but the top leadership has to go. Hamas's ability to rule Gaza has to go, and I don't see that as having been changed in any way, shape, or form by the current pause in the fighting.
President Joe Biden on Sunday welcomed the release of Abigail Edan, the lone American hostage in the weekend's exchange.
A little girl named Abigail, who turned 4 years old. She spent her birthday, and at least 50 days before that, held hostage by Hamas. Today, she's free, and Jill and I, together with so many Americans, are praying for the fact that she is going to be all right.
In a statement Monday, Biden said he had spoken to Abigail's family after her release and vowed, "We will not stop until all of the hostages held by Hamas terrorists are released." As both sides take a breath after 7 weeks of war, the world is watching. Anita Powell, VOA News, the White House.
Here in the United States, a man accused of shooting 3 students of Palestinian descent has pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of attempted murder. 48-year-old Jason J. Eaton was ordered held without bond by a Burlington, Vermont judge. Police are still investigating what led to the attack and say investigators are looking at whether it is a hate-motivated crime. The attack happened over the Thanksgiving weekend. The victims, all 20 years old, are Hisham Abatani, Tashin Halakmad and Kinan Abdulhamid. Relatives of Abatani say the young man was shot in the back and may never walk again. The attack comes amid an increase globally in anti-Semitic and Islamophobic threats and violence. US Attorney General Merrick Garland addressed the troubling rise during a press conference.
As always, but especially now, the Justice Department is remaining vigilant in the face of the potential threats of hate-fueled violence and terrorism. We are closely monitoring the impact that the conflict in the Middle East may have in inspiring foreign terrorist organizations, homegrown violent extremists, and domestic violent extremists, both here in the United States and abroad. All of us have also seen a sharp increase in the volume and frequency of threats against Jewish, Muslim, and Arab communities across our country since October 7th. There is understandable fear in communities across the country. Even as we speak, the ATF and the FBI are investigating the tragic shooting of 3 men of Palestinian descent in Vermont. That investigation, including whether this is a hate crime, is ongoing. Investigative updates by law enforcement officials in Vermont will be coming soon. The Justice Department is poised to provide assistance, any assistance that our state and local law enforcement partners need as we work together to protect our communities. In my conversations with law enforcement, community, and religious leaders, I have reiterated that the Justice Department has no higher priority than protecting the safety and civil rights of everyone in this country. Protecting all people and all communities from hate-fueled violence was the Justice Department's founding purpose in 1870, and it remains our urgent responsibility today. No person and no community in this country should have to live in fear of hate-fueled violence. Fulfilling that promise motivates us every day.
In the wake of the Vermont shooting, the families of the students issued a joint statement demanding full justice and accountability. They say Palestinian children, like everyone else, deserve to feel safe. Closer to the conflict, the fighting has dredged up old hatreds and fears, including for survivors of the 1982 Sabra and Shatila massacre in Lebanon. Nicole Elio reports from the Shatila refugee camp in Beirut.
What we are witnessing in Gaza brings to mind the Sabra Shatila massacre, and perhaps it will soon be our turn to suffer the same fate. That is why we are scared. War means destruction.
People here say images of the war in Gaza are driving them to unconditionally support Hamas militants.
Hamas is a true Palestinian resistance movement. It is carrying out what every Palestinian would like to do. If Israel attacks Lebanon, every Palestinian must be part of the resistance, and I am one of them.
Israel says it has been preparing to open a second front in its war on militants if Hezbollah steps up its attacks from southern Lebanon. Lebanon is already on the verge of collapse after years of the economic chaos. The rising anger and tension among Palestinians in the country and the prospect of a new all-out war is for many Lebanese cause of concern. Nicole D'Ilio, VOA News, Beirut.
Here in the US, relatives of those affected by events in Israel and Gaza hope the pause in fighting will bring some good news after a painful period. From New York, Aaron Renan talks with those who have family ties in the region.
Among the 240 people Hamas took hostage on October 7th was Omer Nutra, a U.S. citizen who had been serving in the Israel Defense Forces. His devastated parents, Orna and Ronan Nutra of Long Island, New York, are grappling with the situation.
This is unimaginable, right? And this has become our reality. This month feels like 3 months, and then again it feels like yesterday.
The uncertainty that we live and the 240 other families live, simply unbearable.
The Nutras are hoping that President Joe Biden, who spoke to them via Zoom, can secure the return of their son.
Originally, we were told that he's going to give us 10-15 minutes. He spent over an hour with us and really expressed his full commitment and his administration full commitment to bring this issue to a resolution. And as he said, it's his top priority.
Others in the New York area are also facing hardship. Sami Shaban, a Palestinian-American attorney and businessman living in New Jersey, says many of his family members have been killed in the Israeli shelling of Gaza in recent weeks.
So this is my uncle Mohammed, who died. This is his wife. This is his whole family. It's my cousin Abdullah and Mohammed. Everybody in this picture is now dead. So I've lost 17 members in total.
Shaban believes that this conflict could persist for years.
Death all around them, there's destruction, and it's impossible to make sense of it. What's happening today is only going to be something that we will feel for 10, 20, 30 years.
Lisa Shirk, a professor of peace studies in Indiana, sees potential for a political solution to the decades-long conflict.
It's in the international community's interest, it's in Israel's interest to make sure that out of this crisis and horrible period, we turn a corner, we have a new paradigm for relationship with Israel and Palestine, and that we don't let a generation of children in Gaza grow up with anger. And of course, that rage turned into the nightmare of October 7th with the war crimes that cannot be justified by any excuse of rage. A win-win for everyone is a political solution that brings real security and real safety to Israelis and Palestinians.
Meanwhile, their loved ones in the United States watch the news and wait. Aaron Renan, VOA News, New York City.
The world's attention has been focused on Israel and Gaza since October. But in Ukraine, the war grinds on. Winter is fast approaching, but that may not signal a slowdown in the fighting. Russia launched its largest drone strike to date on Ukraine over the weekend. Kyiv says it destroyed all but one of those Iranian-made Shahed drones, but the falling debris smashed windows, started fires and caused injuries. A top UN official is calling for solidarity with Ukraine. VOA's Arash Arabasadi has more.
An air raid siren blares amid a Russian drone attack on the Ukrainian capital. The head of the capital city administration, Serhiy Popko, called it the most massive air attack by drones on Kyiv. Ukraine's Air Force said it shot down 74 of the 75 Iranian-made drones. The attack started Saturday, coming in waves for more than 6 hours and leaving 17,000 people without power in the region, according to Ukraine's energy ministry. It also came on the 90th anniversary of the Holodomor famine genocide. Holodomor, which means death by hunger or starvation, was a campaign through 1932 and 33 orchestrated by then-Soviet leader Joseph Stalin to seize control of Ukraine's grain production. At least 3.5 to 7 million Ukrainians died. According to the University of Minnesota, those numbers may be understated.
Caro Presidente Zelensky, caro Volodymyr.
It was against this backdrop that Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni recorded a video message to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Holodomor Memorial Day. She said her government welcomed Kyiv's resolve to continue the Grain from Ukraine humanitarian food program, announcing a further contribution of $2.2 million to the effort. As part of the program, Ukraine partnered with countries and private sector donors to supply its grain to countries in Africa and Asia that face malnutrition and hunger. At a recent meeting of the UN Security Council, Ukraine's permanent representative to the United Nations accused Moscow of again using similar tactics as those in the early 1930s.
Starvation is one of Russia's methods of warfare, has encompassed various components since day one of the full-scale invasion. These include blocking Ukrainian food exports, shelling Ukrainian ports and grain stores, mining Ukrainian fertile soils, and turning them into battlefields.
Following Russia's drone strikes, Zelensky and European leaders met in Kyiv at an international summit on food security. He said foreign partners would supply Ukraine with vessels to accompany and secure convoys of cargo ships from Ukraine's ports. Zelensky added his country hoped to solve air defense shortages through new supplies from partners and increasing Ukraine's own production capacity before another air raid siren cut short the joint news conference. At least 5 civilians in Kyiv were wounded in Russia's assault on the capital, with several buildings damaged from falling debris, including a kindergarten. Those injured include an 11-year-old child, according to Mayor Vitaly Klitschko. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
As well as the risks from shelling and drone strikes, the mines and explosives that pepper Ukraine's landscape pose a real threat. Ukraine's government says that since Russia's invasions, mines have claimed the lives of at least 264 civilians and left more than 830 injured. From Ukraine, Miroslava Gongadze spent time with those involved in the demining efforts.
On Saturday morning, the mining crew in Balaklia, Ukraine's Kharkiv region, are getting ready to go to the field. Russian forces had occupied 1/3 of this region shortly after the start of the war. When they retreated months later, they left this land contaminated with mines. Such weapons have killed at least 264 civilians and injured more than 830 throughout Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022. Emergency personnel here face an unprecedented test, says Anatoly Vrublevsky, the head of the Kharkiv region's demining directorate and overseer of 35 demining units.
The biggest problem is that almost every day, actually every day, people die or get injured. We're talking about the oblast here, 30% of which was occupied. Then, after a counteroffensive operation, it was liberated, and we have very dangerous territory to work on.
Vrublevsky says international support is crucial to their work. Ukrainian deminers make use of all outside assistance, which includes demining machines, protective gear, and transportation. Here in Balaklia, emergency services detect a mine and conduct a controlled explosion. Back in Kyiv, the Ukrainian government coordinates the humanitarian demining effort, bringing together government stakeholders and international partners. Deputy Minister of Economy Igor Beskoroviny oversees the initiative, which for him is personal. In 2016, he lost his leg to an anti-tank mine.
We want return to use an 80% potentially contaminated area.
Beskorvany says Russia violated all norms and practices when it mined the territory, and this poses a significant challenge for the miners. Ukrainian specialists are working on techniques to scan potentially contaminated areas to create a database and map for future demining effort.
We have a situation when territories that contamination have any logic. It's a huge problem because we can predict next step when we're working with logic, but we can't predict the next step when we're working with situations that don't have any logic.
Last spring, the World Bank estimated that Ukraine would require $37.5 billion for demining efforts. However, the need continues to evolve with the war and requires constant re-evaluation. Lithuania is spearheading the European Union's demining efforts in Ukraine. Tomas Matulevičius, the economic attaché of the Lithuanian embassy in Ukraine, says the international coalition must do more.
It's not enough for the moment, but it's just the beginning. And in the future, we hope that it will be more tools, more methods, more financial instruments, and the more, I would say, funds or the government will join the coalition.
The demining of Ukraine could take from 10 to 100 years, he said.
It depends how much money it will be, how much specialists will be prepared here in Ukraine and abroad. So it depends from all us, and we need to do that together.
The unprecedented contamination of Ukrainian land with mines and other explosives, destroying ecosystem and undermining food security in Ukraine and the world, deepening the problem of hunger. Depending on the resources, it can take decades for Ukraine to clean its land, and it will rely on international community to assist with the demining effort. Miroslava Gongadze, VOA News, Balaklia, Kharkiv region, Ukraine.
Before we go, I want to share a story of unity and understanding. Since the October 7 attack on Israel, two New York communities, one Palestinian, the other Israeli, are working together to bridge the gap. Reporter Johnny Fernandez has the details.
A yacht restaurant in the East Village is Manhattan's latest hotspot. Owner Abdul Ilanani says his restaurant has several locations in the suburbs of the Big Apple, but he always wanted to bring Palestinian cuisine to the heart of New York City.
I felt like there was a need for that because there wasn't many, I haven't seen any restaurant that's labeled Palestinian. You'll see Iranian, Persian, Pakistani, Desi, Indian, but never actually Palestinian.
But his timing was off. He opened the new location just days after the Hamas attacks of October 7th in Israel. Some members of the Jewish community stepped up to support the restaurant.
Yes, I'm Jewish, yep. I'm Ashkenazi and Sephardic. My mom is a Jew from Libya, and my dad is Ashkenazi from Eastern Europe.
New York City pediatrician Michael Harris is a frequent customer. He says he loves the restaurant, although he disagrees with political messages some of its decor might carry.
I think coexistence, I think dialogue, I think accepting the other, and I think just recognizing the legitimate rights of both sides to their own country and state.
Lindsay Weiss is another Jewish New Yorker who says her curiosity to learn more about the Palestinian culture keeps her coming back.
Coming into a Palestinian restaurant, a Palestinian space, and enjoying Palestinian food and culture gets us closer to imagining what that multicultural, peaceful place might look like.
She believes Jewish and Palestinian groups have more similarities than differences, and food is the one element bringing both groups together.
Food is really important, so I think coming from that place of common ground and exchanging our cultures and putting them in conversation with each other and realizing that, again, we have so much more in common than we have different, and our goals are actually much more in common than they are different.
In a time when peaceful relations seem hard to imagine, this restaurant is showing how two communities can coexist and work together. Johnny Fernandez, VOA News, New York.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of The Inside Story. For the latest news on the conflict in Israel, log on to voanews.com. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at VOA News and catch up on past episodes at our free streaming service, VOA+. I'm Jessica Dorit. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week on The Inside Story.